early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Please hear a selection from Henry Nouwen entitled God's Imagination. So much of our energy, time, and money goes into maintaining distance from one another. Many, if not most, of the resources of the world are used to defend ourselves against one another, to maintain or increase our power, and to safeguard our own privileged position. Imagine if all that effort being put into the service of peace and reconciliation. Would there be any poverty? Would there be crimes and wars? Just imagine that there was no longer fear among people, no longer rivalry, hostility, bitterness, or revenge. Just imagine all the people on this planet holding hands and forming one large circle of love. We say, I can't imagine. But God says, that's what I imagine. A whole world not only created, but also living in my image. In Montgomery, Alabama, in 1957, Martin Luther King Jr. said to an audience, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Let us pray. Holy and gracious God, as we gather this morning to honor the legacy of Dr. King, help us move beyond ourselves and into the community of all your beloved children. May we focus on what unites us and keep our hearts and eyes and efforts on the center of it all, which is our shared humanity and the sacred call and privilege to love each other. Bless this occasion and all who participate. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. I went to bed a little early last night, and about 11:30 I rolled over, and my wife looked like an Eskimo, and my wife's here this morning, and she was wrapped up to go out and look at the eclipse. And she asked me if I wanted to join her. Of course, I don't know how cold it was then, but it wasn't 17 degrees at that time. But she went out and saw it, had a great experience, but I went ahead and rolled over and went back to sleep so I could be with you this morning. It was chilly this morning, at 17 degrees when I got up. I felt a little better when I got in my car. It was 20 degrees, so maybe it'll warm up a little bit today. It's my pleasure this morning to welcome each of you to our 31st annual Unity Breakfast. It's been about 32 years since Martin Luther King Day was first observed. It was signed into law in 1983, but not observed until 1986, and it took until 2000 until all 50 states observed the holiday. Our Unity Breakfast here in Rocky Mount is a way to come together as a community, and it's appropriate to unite and stand as one community to celebrate the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. We're here today not only to celebrate the life of this remarkable man, but also to take a moment to reflect on its teachings and how they still hold meaning in our daily lives and in today's ever-changing world. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Rick Glazer, who many of you know as the Executive Director of the North Carolina Justice Center. Thank you, Rick. I'd also like to thank North Carolina Wesleyan President Dewey Clark for hosting this annual event, as well as all of our sponsors that helped with today's Unity Breakfast. And again, if you've got one of the bulletins, the inserts there, please thank the sponsors that have helped today. And we appreciate the opportunity for you to join us in this occasion. I'd also like a special thank you for the Martin Luther King Committee, the MLK Committee who worked on this, and many of them have worked for many years on this. If you're a member of that committee, could I ask you to stand at this time? And let's give them a round of applause. And as always, I'd like to especially welcome our young people that are here today and are part of our celebration. Thank you for being here with us today. My hope is that as we leave here today and hearing from Mr. Glazer with the work that he has done, we'll all remember that Dr. King's vision was about equality. And when we leave here this morning, may Dr. King's words of unity and hope inspire us all to continue our efforts for justice and equality each and every day of our lives. I thank you for being here on a cold morning, and God bless us all. Thank you.
Good morning. Like Mayor Combs, it's my pleasure to welcome you here to this special event today. I first want to thank also those individuals in our community, the commission, and the city leaders who have put tireless effort into organizing this event, and to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here this morning. I'm especially honored to welcome you each to the beautiful campus of North Carolina Wesleyan College and to this, the Dunn Center for the Performing Arts. As Mayor Combs stated, Dr. Clark, who unfortunately could not be with us this morning, he wanted me to convey to you just how proud we are to sponsor this event again this year. Like Dr. King, Wesleyan teaches that everyone can make a difference and that each new day is a new chance to do so. Through our classroom lectures, through hands-on experiences, extracurricular activities, we try to build self-confidence and awareness in our students through that message. In fact, today, our Student Activities Coordinator has over 125 Wesleyan volunteers going out into the community to do activities with such groups as Habitat for Humanity, the Boys and Girls Club, Peacemakers, and a cold cleanup effort at Battle Park. We not only equip our students with a diploma, but along the way we try to instill in them the life skills necessary to make an impact on the world after college. Your presence here today is equally as an important statement for our younger generation, like our college students. They see us gathering to celebrate how far we've come in living out Dr. King's dream, but they also notice that all types of people are taking time off from work to come together to celebrate and unite behind a shared vision. We're showing that generation how important a sense of community really is, and that's important. And before I leave, I want to make one note for housekeeping purposes. This isn't about the restrooms, but outside this door here to my right, to your left, is a voter registration table. If you need to register to vote, They're outside and can help you today. It's very important. So again, welcome to Wesleyan's campus. Take time to meander around, and I thank you for being here today.
Good morning. I am Deja Williams, a sophomore at Nash Rocky Mount Early College High School, and I had the pleasure of participating in the Martin Luther King oratorical competition this year. I was really able to express my opinion about Dr. King and how his beliefs have impacted my life. And the experience has really enhanced my leadership ability. And I congratulate both students who are our 2019 winners. The first place winner in grades 6 through 8 is Austin Burton, a 7th grader at Edwards Middle School. Austin's favorite class in school is math because it comes easy to him and it doesn't take him long to understand what his teacher is trying to communicate. He enjoys participating in Odyssey of the Mind and running cross country. He is very active in his church and enjoys doing community service. The first place contest winner in grades 9 through 12 is Harmony Braswell, a 9th grader at Rocky Mount Early College High School. Harmony's favorite class is math because she likes to challenge herself with numbers. In her spare time, she enjoys reading, writing, and listening to music. So sit back, relax, and let's listen to these young people as they share their speeches with us. Austin will speak first, and then Harmony.
Good morning. At the center of it all, hope, love, or peace. Today I want to focus on hope. Hope comes in many shapes and forms. It can mean many things. We normally use it in terms of having a desire of some sort, but it goes beyond desire. Hope is a driving force. With the Civil Rights Movement, its foundation was primarily rooted in hope. Without hope, the movement could have stopped completely. The Civil Rights Movement was the effect of an aspiration people had, so it drove them to take action. It started with Rosa Parks. She willingly broke the law knowing it would have a repercussion that wouldn't benefit her at the moment. She sacrificed because something of value to her for a desired result. She sacrificed because she had hope that what she had done would have an effect on other people and cause them to want to do the same. Rosa Parks herself said, "Each person must live their lives as a model for others." There are many acts that defied laws during the Civil Rights Movement. They range from small acts of rebellion to full-blown protests. Small acts such as the Greensboro sit-ins and full-blown protests such as the March from Selma to Montgomery. Everyone's end goal was equal rights, and they relied on hope to attain it. They never lost hope even when times were tough. They had no clue if their attempts at freedom would succeed, but they had to just keep hoping that their attempts wouldn't be in vain. The Civil Rights Movement driving force was freedom, and their backing force was hope. Many songs speak of the hope that people had and how it kept them pushing, such as "Change is Gonna Come." If they had lost hope, many people would have stopped fighting, gone home, and accepted the reality of how things were. Life wouldn't have changed, and discrimination and racism would have won. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had to have hope also. He hoped that what the movement stood for would come true and the discrimination that Black people faced would come to an end. He had hope that the people he stood for lives would change. Since he was the main face of the movement, he knew that if he lost hope, many others would lose hope also. He had to keep his hope so that others wouldn't lose theirs. The dream of the movement came true. Hope and freedom is what kept the people from veering off the road. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." What are you hoping for? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Harmony, and I will be speaking on the topic of continuing the journey. September 15th, 1963, 4 little girls were killed while attending Sunday school at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. This incident started an uprising among civil rights protesters and gave them a drive to push forward and fight for justice to be rightfully served. The journey for justice began when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made a plea to President Lyndon Johnson so the people of color could have the right to vote. During that time, there were white supremacists whose hate crimes went unpunished. And those appointed to serve in the court as jurors had to be a registered voter. So this excluded all people of color. Dr. King began a peaceful protest so the people of color could become registered voters. He led a 54-mile march from Selma to the capital of Montgomery, Alabama. 25,000 people of different ethnicities and races marched with him. This demonstration pushed Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act on August 6, 1965. We should continue the journey by reminding people of the sacrifices made and the many lives lost of those who fought and paved the way so that all people will have the right to vote. I just recently learned that my program of study was changed without my parents or my consent. You see, when you allow people to make decisions without you, but their decisions involve you, that takes away your voice. My parents taught me the importance of having a voice in this world. A voice that will be heard. A voice that will transform my future outcomes. A voice that will speak up for what's right when I know that I've been treated wrong. A voice that will change lives. A voice that will make a difference in places far away. And a voice that shows the world that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s journey was not in vain. People, don't be silent about the things that matter to you. Let's continue the journey and use our voices and exercise our rights. Thank you.
Happy MLK Day to everyone. We shall overcome. Who is Rick Glazier, our speaker for today? He is a justice fighter, a former legislator for 14 years, a practicing lawyer and law professor, a former public defender, and a chair of the county school board. He is Jewish. He is a friend, colleague, and mentor to many, including myself. He was recognized as Legislator of the Year by at least 15 different organizations. He is a husband, father, and grandfather. He was the gold standard for good lawmaking. Everybody on both sides of the aisle wanted him on their bills as a sponsor or supporter if they could get him. He was a great debater in the legislature and is a legal specialist in many areas, including ethics and non-discrimination law. Glazier filed and passed so many bills as a legislator that when the new party majority came in, they imposed a cap on the House side on how many bills a lawmaker could sponsor. It was called the Glazier limit by his colleagues. The North Carolina Justice Center that he now directs is one of the nation's premier legal organizations for economic and social justice. Rooted in the North Carolina legal services movement, the center has a mission to eliminate poverty in North Carolina and is indispensable to lawmakers, government officials at all levels, and our communities. The center has been here in our community for many forums and outreach efforts on health care, mental health care, education, the state budget, and tax issues. The Justice Center operates 8 projects: North Carolina Policy Watch, a news and commentary outlet, the North Carolina Budget and Tax Center, the Consumer and Housing Project, the Education and Law Project, Health Advocacy Project, the Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project, the Workers' Rights Project, and the North Carolina Second Chance Alliance of people with criminal records, their families, service providers, congregations, community leaders, and concerned citizens addressing the causes of criminal records and the barriers they create to successful reentry. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "It is still one of the tragedies of human history that the children of darkness, meaning those against justice and fairness, are frequently more determined and zealous than the children of light, meaning those fighting for justice and equity." Rick Glazier has the determination and leads an organization that is also zealously dedicated to making sure that the weight of all of us is put against the long arc of the moral universe, as described by Dr. King, so that it will keep bending towards justice. Let's give him a Rocky Mount and Twin County welcome.
Well, I'm tempted to do two things. One, to go back into politics with that introduction. And the second, to stand up here and say, I'm just going to rest on what Austin and Harmony said and sit down. Mr. Mayor, Senator Bryant, Representative Galea, Mr. Jones, I think Senator and former Lieutenant Governor candidate Eric Mansfield, who's in the audience. Thank you for all of you for your extraordinary invitation to be with you today as we celebrate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King in a city where Dr. King delivered the earliest version of his I Have a Dream speech at Booker T. Washington High School on November 27, 1962. I want to begin my talk today by focusing not on some of the more notable aspects of Dr. King's legacy, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, all of his work on bringing humanity together on civil rights generally. But I want to talk about 4 issues of our day and think together how Dr. King might view these issues were he here and were he looking at our state and our nation in this moment in time. And then I want to turn my attention as I conclude to the idea that was central to his legacy and of this day, and that is of service. The essence of who he was and what he has left for us. The first of the issues I want to talk about is the environment. We face today global warming, climate change, environmental injustice at home and abroad, deregulation of environmental protections, dirtier air, dirtier water, Gen X and coal ash, just to name a few. And the question is, what would Dr. King have said? What did he say as we face these challenges here at home, throughout the country, and abroad? Dr. King, as a visionary, talked about many issues that touched on justice and spoke about the separation of moral judgment from technological advances. And his legacy gave fruit to what we know today as the environmental justice movement, which seeks to ensure a cleaner and healthier environment for all people. And he framed many of his discussions on the universal terminology of the natural world. Dr. King said, never, never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or an animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small compared to the wounds we inflict on our soul when we look the other way. He talked about the fact that our scientific power too often outruns our spiritual power. And we have guided missiles, but too often misguided men. He talked about the need to rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. The most important legacy Dr. King left in this arena was his idea of relationships, of interconnectedness. He talked about interconnectedness as one of the most important principles of conservation, in the sense that everything we do impacts others, even in the smallest ways. Dr. King recognized that social justice could not be achieved without environmental justice. That included living environments for underprivileged communities and universal access to clean air, clean water, clean soil. In 1967, at Christmas, in his sermon, he said the following: "It really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects one indirectly. Did you ever stop to think that you can't leave for your job in the morning without being dependent on most of the world. That is the way our universe is structured. This is the interrelational quality. We aren't going to have peace on earth until we recognize this basic fact of the interrelated structure of all reality. Dr. King's actions not only led to the Civil Rights Acts that we know and the Voting Rights Act, but in fact also to the Clean Air Act in 1963 and the Clean Water Act in 1972 and the Endangered Species Act of 1973, because he recognized, as great movements do, that civil rights and environmental justice were inexorably linked. The second issue: what would Dr. King say about where we are in healthcare in America today? Van Newkirk wrote about a year and a half ago, he talked about a cold March night when Dr. King turned his pulpit towards the issue of healthcare. And he spoke to a packed, mixed-race crowd of physicians and healthcare workers in Chicago. And he gave one of the most influential speeches of his late career, blasting the American Medical Association and others for a conspiracy of inaction in the maintenance of medical apartheid that existed even back then in 1966. And he said one of his most famous lines, quote, "Of all the inequalities that exist, the injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhuman," end quote. And in that moment, says Newkirk, it reflected the work that Dr. King and that organization, the Medical Committee for Human Rights, were doing to advance one of the most forgotten pillars of the civil rights movement, the idea of healthcare as a right. 53 years later, today, those demons have not been completely defeated. Dr. King's quotation has become a rallying cry for all of us who seek to defend the Affordable Care Act passed by President Barack Obama. It is that legislation that has brought us as close as we have ever been in this country to establishing a universal guarantee of health care. But let's face it, the Trump administration is determined to inflict death by 1,000 wounds on that system. Yet what we understand is what Dr. King understood in 1966. It is people of color, it is low-income people who are the most likely groups to gain coverage under the Affordable Care Act now and in the centuries-old struggle over health. We have never been closer in one sense to full equality of that health care, yet so close to slipping in a door that would take us so far away. It bears, I guess, repeating and reminding that the NAACP and the National Medical Association, that is the black professional organization that was formed when the AMA was segregated, led by Montague Cobb, fought for the passage of Medicare and Medicaid. They organized, they directed action, they passed legal challenges, they lobbied, they did everything needed to make those things we now take for granted in the healthcare arena law. And so in 1963, just a week before passing the Voting Rights Act, 65, I'm sorry, a week before passing the Voting Rights Act, Congress passed an amendment to the Social Security Act that authorized Medicare and Medicaid. And while we don't often think of that as part of Dr. King's legacy, it was deeply a part of his legacy. What would he say about public education in our state today? Perhaps one of the most fundamental principles for Dr. King was that all depended on a quality, equal education for all of us. In the 51 years since Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, his dream of an education system providing equal opportunity to all children remains unfulfilled. He said in a speech in 1964, "The walling off of black citizens from equal education is part of the historical design to submerge him into a second-class status." We have come a long way since then, but then we think where we are on non-transparent, discriminatory, non-accountable vouchers in our state. We think about where we are in terms of having, in the last 8 years in North Carolina, fallen to 49th in the country in teacher salary competitiveness. 51st just 2 years ago in teacher principal pay. I mean, let's face it, usually we could say, thank God for Mississippi, but we couldn't even say that when it came to teacher pay. We've cut 4,000 teacher positions, 2/3 of our teacher assistants, eliminated all professional development money, eliminated all money for mentoring, eliminated teaching fellows programs, eliminated teacher career status protections, and instead replaced it with A to F grading of schools. We see threats to the Department of Public Instruction, threats to the Federal Department of Education, major cuts to innovation, research, and grants at university levels, and even the elimination in Washington at the Department of Education of the fight for affirmative action in university admissions policies. What would Dr. King say? I think instead of moving towards his dream, he would say these current policies, if not changed at both levels, move us further away. He reminded us back in the 60s that the richest nation on earth has never allocated enough resources to build sufficient schools, to compensate adequately its teachers, and to surround them with the prestige the work justifies. What I would tell you, and what I think is important here, is the remembrance that a quality education, the opportunity for a world-class, globally competitive education, is the fundamental right of every child and systemically the fundamental necessity for any nation that hopes to prosper and flourish. In the end, when we build great schools, when we support those schools, a love of children exists. We help plant the tree of knowledge in each child, sustain the tree of life in our community, and by our daily devotion to public education and our children, nurture the tree of love for every child, too many of whom see and hear and feel things no child should have to endure. What education reminds us is, while many of us try to think about what a child will be tomorrow, we can never forget the person they are today. You know, Dr. King would say, I think, contrary to the political nearsightedness of critics of public education, that our best chance to truly impact student achievement isn't by waving the magic wand of more standardized tests, more vouchers, more charters, or the educational reform of the day, but instead by devoting gifts of time and attention and love to every child. I am a lawyer, and I love my profession. But we don't need more lawyers, we need more teachers. In the end, teaching is the only profession that attempts to elevate our society one child at a time. Teachers strive to see the best in their students, even when others may see little hope. No other profession besides education reaches out to the brilliant and the challenged at the same time, the gifted and the average at exactly the same moment. Teachers' educational systems leave the world a little better than they found it, knowing that if they have redeemed just one life, they have done God's work. And for every profession that exists in this room, society, we owe a debt of gratitude to their teachers, because none would exist without them. Before I leave to the fourth of the issues, I have to be reminded of a story that I heard years ago that I think Dr. King would have appreciated. It's called the Blueberry Story. Some of you may know it, some of you may not, but it's true. There was a contest in our country in the early 1990s for the best ice cream in the country. And the ice cream that won was a blueberry ice cream out of Boston. Not Ben & Jerry's, but sort of the same idea. And the businessman who headed that particular ice creamery decided that his children went to public schools, but they weren't everything they could be, and he was going to devote 18 months to talking around the country, lecturing about how to improve public schools. And his thought was, the business principles I applied to my ice cream should be applied to the schools, and we will have the same effect. And he went around the country and did that, and in one of his last speeches, it was in Cleveland, Ohio, And he spoke in an audience in a room at a university similar to this. And he gave his lecture about total quality management, business principles, how if we just did these things, education would be so much better. And in the question and answer, a woman stood up and she said, "Sir, can I ask you a few questions?" He said, "Of course." She said, "Well, we are told that you manage a company that makes great ice cream." And he smugly replied, "Best ice cream in America." "How nice," she said. "Is it rich and smooth?" 16% butterfat, he crowed. "Premium ingredients, I suppose," she inquired. "Super premium, nothing but AAA," he said. And then he never saw the next line coming. So she leaned forward and said, "And when you're standing at the receiving dock and you see an inferior shipment of blueberries, what do you do?" And he could hear in the silence of the room the trap beginning to shut close. And he stated, "Well, I send them back." And she said, "That's right. And there, sir, is the difference between your company and the ice cream you make in the public schools, because we never send our blueberries back. We take them big and small, rich and poor, gifted and exceptional, abused and frightened. We take them with ADHD, junior rheumatoid arthritis, and English as a second language. We take them all, every one of them, and that, sir, is why we are not a business, we are a school, and we teach children." Now for the fourth issue before we turn to the finishing time on service. And it is an issue which has divided this country almost hourly on the television in the campaign of 2016 and has become so polarizing. And it is the issue of immigration and refugee rights. Immigrants come to this nation because they believe in the American dream. They were brought here as children often without documents and call themselves dreamers for the chance to become American citizens. They and their parents believed that they were coming to a country, a just and fair democracy, from places that didn't have that, in the hopes of living and working and fulfilling the dream that every parent has with his child. John Lewis, Representative Lewis, on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's death, discussed on MSNBC what Martin Luther King would say about immigrants. And he said he would be speaking up. He would say that America is not right, and that we need to do the right thing to look out for all the people in our country. And he would say that we are one people, we are one family, we all live in the same house, not just the American house, but the world house. And he would say we must live together as brothers and sisters, because if not, we will perish as fools. Martin Luther King would say, I think, and we can say with a good deal of confidence, that the factors that shaped and informed his thinking on every issue would be the same ones that would form his view on immigration. And those factors would include the witness of the Bible, in the case of biblical pronouncements about the treatment of immigrants by citizens of a country not their own, Dr. King's belief that every human being is imagino Dei, made in the image of God. These factors would have undergirded his foundational ethical teaching as it relates to immigration. And one of the most important themes in the Old Testament is hospitality and care for the sojourner, the alien, the stranger, the foreigner. The Bible gives specific directives on how they should be treated. Among them are the following. Society has a sacred responsibility for the welfare of immigrants. Deuteronomy says, God loves the foreigners who live with our people and gives them food and clothing, so then show love for those foreigners because you were once a foreigner in Egypt. And immigrants are to be treated with justice and fairness. Deuteronomy, cursed be anyone who deprives the alien, the orphan, and the widow of justice. And he would say regulatory protections are to be provided for immigrants. Deuteronomy again, you shall not withhold the wages of the poor and needy laborers, whether they are citizens or aliens who reside in your land. And he would say, immigrants are to be accepted as social equals. Deuteronomy, you shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And we know from his letter from a Birmingham jail where he wrote, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, and whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And never again can we afford to live with a narrow, provincial, outsider, agitator idea. Anyone, he wrote, who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. I am reminded as I finish on this topic of the Old Testament story of Abraham. Abraham lived for many years in Beersheba, where he had a wonderful tent. It was set up in the middle of a garden and had doors facing north, east, south, and west. And from whatever direction a traveler came in, it was always easy to find a way of entering. And Abraham became famous because of his hospitality. He gave food and drink and shelter and clothing and even money to his visitors. As it was needed, so he gave. And when a guest tried to thank Abraham, he would say, don't thank me, give thanks to God who provides food and drink to all living things. And usually the guest would indeed do that. However, one night, a stranger came to his tent, and after the meal, the stranger took out a wooden idol and said, now I will thank my God for your generous home. And Abraham tried to get the man to worship the one true God in his mind, but the man refused to abandon his idol. And in anger, Abraham drove him from the tent. And God then spoke to Abraham and said something like this, Abraham, I have been able to put up with that man for 70 years. For all that time, I saw to it that he had food and shelter, and you couldn't put up with him for one night? What gives? Well, we seem to be in our nation no longer a nation known as a welcoming place, a nation of bridges to and from other lands. Now, in the current environment, we seek to replace bridges and open arms with walls and closed fists. And instead of finding ways to create safe places for all of the people who need to come here, who want to come here, to fight violence and persecution and torture they find at home, instead, we put up barriers. The Statue of Liberty beckoned people to our country, but walls, fences, or beaded curtains are going to replace them on our southern border. What would Dr. King say about that? I suspect he would say it is the height of inhumanity to man. So what do we do in a nation that seems to be at a true fork in the road, when partisanship and polarization, bigotry and racism, hate and anger seem to be so much the current currency? Well, I think we turn to emulate the person whose legacy we are here to talk about and honor today, and that is of service and commitment. We serve, we teach, and we love more. Service is a way of thinking. It is an attitude that involves more than just responding to verbalized needs. It involves perceiving unvoiced requests and capitalizing on all of our available opportunities, individually and together as communities. It is an affirmative, assertive commandment of God, not simply a voluntary, fortuitous opportunity of response. Service to others is an action. It is what we do, not just what we say. And giving, whether we are talking of our time or money, is an obligation and a standard of excellence that should be a central fabric in our life, not merely mechanical. You know, the idea of service is an idea that transcends religious barriers and political ideologies. It is an obligation to help those in need by giving them money or material goods, or more often, advice and a helping hand. It is not dependent on our desire to give. It is an ethical, and Dr. King would say moral commitment we must fulfill. The giving of ourselves, and whether it is through time or money, lets that time or money become a means of creating holiness. God is the creator of both rich and poor, and I believe Dr. King believed, that God wanted all of his children to help each other, and through the act of giving, make the world, for at least that brief moment in time, a more loving community. In my religion, there was a very learned rabbi named Rabbi Eliezer. and he would give a coin to a beggar and begin to pray. And when asked to explain his actions, he quoted from Psalms, "Through giving shall I see God's face." The act of giving helps and involves technique. There are quality issues as well as quantity issues. The effect of good service to others relates to both to the lasting effect of our giving and the sensitivity about the manner in which we help others. We should serve with the kind of care and sensitivity which comes from truly enjoying what we are doing. Many centuries ago lived a scholar named Maimonides, and he said, "Service to community and those in need comes in many forms, but the best way is to help a person help him or herself to do better." Everyone falls and fails at something in their life, and it is our job as human beings, in loving our neighbor, to help with a helping hand, to get them to start climbing back up the ladder of success, and only we, individually and together, have that opportunity. To highlight Maimonides' ladder of giving, in the ancient temple in Jerusalem, there was a secret chamber where those who wished to give in secret could go and leave their gifts, and where those who wished to take in secret could go and take what was needed. And no one knew who gave, and no one knew who took, but the community and that person were better off. So why do we serve? As I conclude, I'll talk about three final reasons. 1, a commandment. 2, a responsibility towards community, and I mean that in a broad sense. And 3rd, because giving helps us be better people. First, the commandment. Psalm says, "The earth and everything that grows there is the Lord's. The world and all who dwell there are the Lord's too." Thus, it seems to me our job is to take great care of what has been given to us. We can use the things in the world to support ourselves, but everything we have in its most basic sense is really loaned to us, and we have been provided with our eyes and hands and mind to learn and to grow. My religion teaches me that people were created to work and keep the world a good place, and that God lets us use it if we meet our responsibilities to share the world's bounty. In that regard, the laws of tithing, which govern every religion, are really the landlord's conditions. We are allowed to work and reap profit, but only because we share with all of God's children, whether they are rich or poor, black or white, young or old. The second reason to serve is community. There is a saying, and Senator Bryant will remember I used this several times on the House floor. "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" Everyone in this room belongs to a family, some big, some small, some live in one place, some in multiple locations, but all families provide certain things for their members: clothing and food and shelter and love and companionship. And for a family to fulfill its commitment, every member must meet their responsibilities. Well, all of us also belong to our community and our state and our nation and this world. And the community provides for us here education and protection and recreation and transportation and jobs. And just as with our family, we must contribute to our community's maintenance, paying taxes for sure, abiding by its laws, but as important, contributing to community service and religious and governing organizations, helping those in need. Think of what would happen if we failed to do that. Illiteracy, hunger, homelessness, disease, starvation. We are in the end always talking about real people who are dramatically affected by our contributions of time and assistance or the lack thereof. The goal of every member of the community, children and adult, is to help alleviate human suffering. In our lifetime, we must all be good parents and siblings and children and spouses, but we must also be good stewards of our community, our state, our nation, and our time on this planet. There is a solemn obligation passed to each of us by previous generations, and by living here, we agree to accept it, and it is to improve our community and leave it a better place for our presence. And there is a trust placed in us, all of us, by future generations not yet born, To fulfill, as every generation must, our maintenance obligation to fight poverty and disease, ignorance and prejudice, apathy and distrust. When there are tears and suffering in our community, we all should weep. When a cry of despair is heard, we must all answer and assist. And when we see a project unfinished, we should all work together to complete it. There is no escape from this duty, and words and thoughts are no substitute. I want us to remember there is always time in our daily lives to exhibit random acts of kindness to others. In our life, to care deeply for people besides ourselves, to love and to be loved. That was essential to Dr. King's message. And although sometimes it seems in the tangled World Wide Web we weave, we are all sitting ducks quacking digital code, that sound does not reflect the true meaning of being a human being. Tom Brokaw wrote years ago, "No piece of software, no server, no network replaces human contact, love, kindness, commitment, and dreams. No computer can replace the moral underpinning of a life lived well, and it would be a terrible shame," he wrote, to say, "if we woke up one day to find that while we have wired the world, we have short-circuited our souls." In the quiet times of reflection, it is helpful for us all to remember that if we had just one more hour to live, it would not be that we would wish for a bigger house, more cyberspace to explore, more money to spend, but instead I suspect it would be to spend one more hour with the family we love, with our friends, and to do something to leave the world after us a better place for us having been here. Anna Quinlan, one of my favorite authors, wrote, "We all want to do well in our lives, but if we do not also do good with our lives, doing well will never be enough." So I turn then to the third point about why we give and why we serve and why it was such a central part of Dr. King's legacy. And that is because it simply feels good to do so. It helps sensitize us to others and their needs, which makes us a better person. Serving others makes us become the person we really want to be. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us." I close my comments in this regard and end my talk today with two stories that highlight the point. There was once a famous charity collector who went to the house of an equally famous miser in his community. And the miser was a very rich but very selfish and very lonely person. But in spite of this, the charity collector came to his door and asked for a donation. And the man then invited him in and began to yell at him, "Why is the only time people come to my door to ask for the money? I've earned it. I have a right to it. I'm going to keep it. No one cares about me except my money. I'm not going to give you any." And the charity collector said, "Well, may I ask you to do two things for me?" And the man said, "All right." He said, "First, go to the window and tell me what you see." The man went to the window and said, "Well, I see people walking out on the street." The man then picked up a mirror and said, "Look in this mirror and tell me what you see." And the man said, "Well, I see only myself." And the charity collector said, "Well, isn't that the lesson, which is so very simple? Look into the silver and you see only yourself. Take away the silver from the glass and you see the rest of the community." And so that's really what Martin Luther King was telling us to do, to take the silver away from the glass and see the rest of the community. The last story is a true story about a man you will know by the name of Alfred Nobel. Nobel won his fortune in the United States as an inventor of dynamite. But one day, he had a twin brother, and one day the brother died. And a Swiss newspaper was writing the obituary but got it wrong and instead printed Alfred Nobel's obituary instead of that of his brother. And here's how it started out, quote, "Alfred Nobel, who invented a way to kill more people faster than anyone in history, died yesterday, a wealthy man." End quote. Nobel then had the opportunity none of us will have to read his own obituary and to say, "That is not how I want to be remembered." And so, from that day forward, he took his entire fortune and devoted it to the Nobel Prizes. And so today, everyone associates Alfred Nobel with peace, humanity, and justice, and hardly anyone remembers he was the inventor of dynamite. Like Nobel, Martin Luther King would tell us to take our humanity, our dreams, our talent, our ethic, our character, and leave everyone a better world. And in the end, that is, of course, the challenge for all of us, individually and collectively. Life is a gift from God, but what we do with our life is our gift to God. And I would argue, in closing, action, not words. Touch the sick, the poor, the children, the powerless, and never mind quoting Leviticus. For the record, I have never written God's name without capitalizing the G, but that is the letter. What Dr. King would tell us, what truly matters is the spirit. Thank you very much.
Rick, come on back up here. That was great. A lot of good information for us this morning to remember each and every day of our lives. So thank you for being with us today. On behalf of the City of Rocky Mount, we want to recognize you as our keynote speaker and as an envoy of fellowship and goodwill, the title of an honorary citizen in the City of Rocky Mount on this 31st day of annual MLK Unity Breakfast. And again, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your information. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
The annual award presented by the Human Relations Commission began in 1991 to acknowledge individuals and organizations that have made outstanding contributions in human relations within the Twin County region. This year's recipient is very well known in the community for their compassion and assistance provided to victims of disaster and life-saving blood collections. This year's recipient is the Frederick E. Turnage chapter of the American Red Cross. The American Red Cross Frederick E. Turnage chapter prevents and alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. The Red Cross provides compassionate care in 5 critical areas: disaster preparedness, response and recovery, support for members of the military, veterans and their families, life-saving blood collections, training, and international relief. Over 130 Red Cross volunteers, donors, and community partners like the United Way of Tar River region help make their mission possible. In 2018, the Red Cross responded to 79 house fires and disaster events in the Nash and Edgecombe counties, serving 320 people. During Hurricane Florence, the Red Cross and their partners along the East Coast opened 172 shelters, had over 101,000 shelter stays, and provided over 1.3 million meals and snacks with partners. In Nash and Edgecombe counties, there were a total of 8 shelters, and 600 people were sheltered during the storm. The need for blood is constant. Every 2 seconds, someone in America requires blood. Thanks to volunteer donors, the Red Cross answers the call for life-saving blood about 13,000 times a day. In Nash and Edgecombe counties, 7,759 blood donations were collected in 2018. The Red Cross helps the military, veterans, and their families prepare for, cope with, and respond to the challenge of military service. Remarkable Rocky Mount did not just happen overnight. We can claim that honor because we are organizations like the American Red Cross Frederick E. Turnage chapter contributing to the betterment of our community. On behalf of the Human Relations Commission, it gives me a great pride to present this award to the American Red Cross Frederick E. Turnage chapter. Accepting on behalf of the Red Cross chapter is Callie Edwards, Northeastern North Carolina Executive Director. Callie, would you please come up? Would you say a few words?
Yes. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. The Red Cross, we are proud to be a humanitarian organization that we also believe recognizes many of the principles brought by Martin Luther King Jr., and we are so pleased to be your partner and here with you because our work cannot happen without people like you, our volunteers, and the donors that help make this essential service delivery necessary here in the Twin Counties. Thank you so much.
A while back, the Rocky Mount City Council passed a resolution. Many of you know that we didn't have an MLK street here in Rocky Mount, so the City Council did pass a resolution at one of our council meetings, but we wanted to make it more official here in Rocky Mount, and we have a special guest with us this morning. I say special, everybody in the room probably knows him. He's our representative on the North Carolina Department of Transportation Board. He's been the past chairman of the Rocky Mount Chamber, the past president of the North Carolina JCs. He's been involved in local and state government probably most of his adult life. He does a great job of directing some money down to Nash and Edgecombe counties. We've got projects probably totaling over $300 million in our area now. Good reason for that is his work with the DOT. So at this time, I want to call up my friend Gus Tullis, and he's going to make a special presentation and read the resolution that we passed. Thank you, Gus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm excited to be here today, and this has been a wonderful, wonderful program. And these young kids, the talks they gave, I did not envy Rick coming up and having to follow them, but you did a wonderful job, and we were really, really proud of you. And I've got Reverend Milton Bullock, Reverend Batts. As soon as I read this resolution, I'm going to present that to him. But real quickly, a little bit about the Department of Transportation. In North Carolina, we have something like 105,000 miles of highway, and the state of North Carolina maintains about 85,000 of those miles. The rest of them are maintained by municipalities and communities. We're second only to Texas in the number of highway maintained miles that are looked after. North Carolina is and has been known as the good roads state. And I think if you've ever traveled outside of North Carolina, particularly when you get on side roads, the back roads or whatever, North Carolina still has wonderful, wonderful roads compared to some of the other states. So we've been very fortunate, and the state really, really puts a lot of money in it every year. I could tell you a lot more, but in essence, in respect of time, a couple little tidbits. So I looked up on Martin Luther King Highway. Over 950 streets are named after Martin Luther King Jr. in 41 states. And in North Carolina, 28 cities have streets named after Dr. King. So I think that's a wonderful tribute to Dr. King. Now I'd like to present the resolution that the Honorable Mayor was talking about. This was done a couple of years ago, and the reason we didn't have a dedication back then, I think we had hurricanes or floods or whatever, we had a lot of stuff going on, and so, but we wanted to get the signs up, and they are up and have been up. But this resolution was adopted January 11th of 2017. I was going to read the whole thing. It's got a lot of whereas, but let me just highlight what we're trying to do here. It says this is a resolution of the City Council of the City of Rocky Mount supporting the street name change of the section of US 64 from I-95, and that's exit 464, to Raleigh Boulevard That's exit 472 to the Martin Luther King Jr. Highway. And I'd like to present that to Reverend Batts.
I would like to ask the commission, the MLK commission, to please stand. We worked hard to make this successful, and we want to thank the Department of Transportation and the City of Rocky Mount and for the Martin Luther King Jr. Commission for their effort. We appreciate it. And if you have not seen the sign, if you would travel on Highway 64, you will see the marker. And we are thankful to have such a marker and a street dedicated to the memory and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you.
Good morning. If you would all please stand with me in reciting the litany. Today we celebrate the life and work of a man who was committed to justice and freedom for all people. Today we honor the life of a man who understood the values that are important to life, the things that are at the center of it all. Dr. King recognized that we are truly brothers and sisters, bound by ties that transcend any earthly relationships we might claim. He reminded us that at the center of it all, we are the children of God. Dr. King understood that how we treat someone else says far more about us than it does about them. He reminded us that at the center of it all is kindness. Dr. King responded to a call which demanded that all of God's children live in freedom with dignity and opportunity. He reminded us at the center of it all is justice. Dr. King refused to resort to violence to attain his goals or defeat his enemies. He called to us to draw on a higher power to resolve our conflicts and achieve our dreams. He reminded us that at the center of it all is love. Today we dedicate the highway markers which stand on Highway 64 at the interchanges of Interstate 95 and Business Highway 64, and identify that section of roadway as the Martin Luther King Jr. Parkway. May all who see his name proudly displayed celebrate his life and his work for us all. May all who traverse the highway live by his commitment to nonviolent and well-being for all. May all who travel this road to places within our community and to other places near and far remember the responsibilities and opportunities that are ours. May this road, which offers access to various parts of our community, remind us of the multitude of ways in which we are joined together in this wonderful city we call our home. May all who use this road to visit our city discover a community where harmony, kindness, justice, and love are at the center of it all. Thank you.
Good morning. I have the privilege to bring the last good morning from the stage, and I know you are probably happy. We have assembled here today to raise our consciousness as to how the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. continues. We have heard inspirational speeches from our young oratorical winners that were just profound and precise. We have heard the relevant issues that still face our community and our nation, and have been reminded that we still have a responsibility to change the world. And we've heard inspirational music that have reminded us that God must be at the center of it all. So I raise the question with us, where do we go from here? The psalmist declares, "Teach me, O Lord, the way of your statutes." and I shall keep it unto the end. Give me understanding, and I shall keep your law. Yes, I shall observe it with my whole heart. There was a benediction offered by Bishop Allen Gates at a Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration that I like to lift up as our closing. And this is what he said. With the voice of a prophet Amos, we heard him say, hate evil, love good, maintain justice in the courts. So pray, my brothers and sisters, that we would know the evil we must hate, the good we must love, and the justice we must pursue without ceasing. With the voice of a prophet did Jane Addams say, the good we secure for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secured for all of us and incorporated into our common life. So pray, my brothers and sisters, that we will not rest until the common good in this commonwealth is uncommonly complete. With the voice of a prophet did Desmond Tutu say, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has his foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. So pray, my brothers and sisters, that we do not remain neutral when injustice is the elephant in the room. With the voice of a prophet did Mary Wollstonecraft say, it is justice, not charity, that is wanting in the world. So pray, my brothers and sisters, that we not satisfy our consciousness with charity, but save our souls with justice. With the voice of a prophet did Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. say, with faith we will be able to go on to carve a tower of hope on the mountain of despair, and will bring into being that great dream and create right here in America a nation where all will live together and respect the dignity and worth of their human personality. In a year and in a time when our mountain of despair seems to have grown higher rather than lower, pray, my brothers and sisters, that we will yet carve that tower of hope on the mountain of despair. Pray that, like Dr. King, you and I might be possessed by righteousness until that day when righteousness reigns supreme. Can we join hands together and stand and pray for our closing? And now, Lord, hear our prayer, hear our supplication, and hear how our heart beats. We long for change. We long for a community that will reflect your kingdom. We long for a community where all are raised up to the same level of equality and all have access to privilege, all have access to the resources that exist in our world. We pray now that we will love one another and that we will be knitted together with all your power and with all your love and with your spirit. It is in your name we pray. Amen.